Hey everyone, I just wanted to start this video with a content warning. These stories talk a lot about SA, grooming, pedophiles, and more. If any of these topics bother you or make you feel extremely uncomfortable, please don't hesitate to click away and choose a different video on our channel. There's plenty more that can be found there with much more heartwarming content. And now, onto the video. Women who dated older men as teenagers? Why? Story 1. He was my guidance counselor. I didn't realize how creepy he was until he proposed. The whole thing was messed up. My high school guidance counselor was the least useful person in my entire school's administration. As a student interested in pursuing a degree in architecture, it was recommended that I take Spanish 5 rather than architecture because Spanish is useful. I was also reminded to make sure I had all the required prerequisites for the classes I was interested in. Like if I wanted to take Art 2D or Art 3D, make sure I took Art 1D first. She tried to convince a friend to turn down an offer to Harvard for community college because she might miss home. The guidance counselor at our middle school had only girls, and a few most often in his office, door shut. You could feel that it was off, even though I was naive and knew nothing about it, and this was confirmed when I asked one why she was in there alone a lot, and she looked absolutely panicked. As an adult, I heard he had been at the high school and they moved him because of some improprieties. Keep it creepy, 1980s. I can't believe he proposed to a literal child. These people shouldn't be in these positions. Story 2. I was 15 with a 21-year-old. He hung around the youth group and made all of us younger girls feel special with his attention. I was shy and quiet, didn't stand out much, but obviously wanted the special attention that all the prettier, peppier girls got. He wasn't interested until he found out my mom worked nights and I was home alone. We ended up getting into a pretty heated argument and split when 2 weeks in. I still hadn't let him come over because I was terrified of what my mom would do if she knew I had had anyone over while she was gone. I had a similar age gap when I was 15. We dated from when I was 15 to 18. Then he broke up with me as soon as I was an adult. Later on, he said we couldn't be in any contact because he was afraid I would try to manipulate him. I had no idea what I could possibly be manipulating for. I'm 24 now, and I realized earlier this year that he didn't want me to realize and accuse him of the pedophilia he'd been committing for the last 3 years. The first person I remember being preyed on by was a youth group leader who was about 19, I believe. He wasn't the youth pastor, of course, and we did have other actual adult leaders that were middle-aged parents, but we also had a few young people around 18 to 21 that acted as youth group leaders. I was flattered by the attention at first, but when he cornered me in an elevator on a youth group trip and started trying to make out with me, I was very uncomfortable and wanted no part of it. He was tall and I was very short, so I turned my head away from him awkwardly, kind of squirming to avoid his face, and as soon as the elevator bell went off, I ducked under his arms, which were against the wall on either side of me, and ran as fast as I could. Thankfully, he didn't pursue me. I did end up telling one of the adult leaders I trusted, and he left me alone after that at least. But he was still a youth group leader and continued to be around young, vulnerable girls for years to come. I moved away a couple of years later. Story 3. I was 15 and met a 30-year-old who was an older brother of a boy I met in group therapy. He used to tell me how complicated and mature I was. LOL, so cliche. I'm now 24 and seeing or interacting with anyone who is 15 makes me sick. I felt so old then, but it's insane now how obvious to me that people that age are children. I had this revelation a while ago and it blows my mind that a 34-year-old abused 16-year-old me. My husband was 34 when we met, and watching him interact with his best friend's 16-year-old daughter was night and day different from the way I was treated by this person, and it drove him the difference for me. I was in an awkward conversation, telling my ex-friend he's an actual pedophile, talking to a girl who was a victim of trauma. He asked me to be on a Skype call to see how grown up she was. I felt sick. She was talking for 20 minutes about how someone in her chemistry class took her seat and what drama ensued, while talking in a cute kitten voice the entire time. It wasn't her fault. She had a dad who left and an obvious eating disorder and probably an entire array of issues, but he was a pathetic man-child who felt like he wasn't good enough for anything, so went after mentally ill teens since they were easy to manipulate. She was 15 and he was 26. I really had no idea stuff like this was that common. Story 4. I met a dude on Adult Swim's forums back when I was around 12. He was 24 and was nice to me. Things always seemed hinky to me, even from the beginning, but I had no friends in real life and was definitely in an ugly duckling place, so I figured that if this was who was going to pay attention to me, so be it. He would tell me the things he wanted to do to me and eventually sent me a hideously low-res picture of his D, and all I remember is trying to laugh it off and said I thought he sent me a picture of a sock. Eventually, he started asking if we could meet in person and if he could tie me up and take nudes of me. He started talking about buying a plane ticket to visit me and for my address, and I guess I finally had a bad enough gut feeling and didn't go through with it. My family eventually found out about us talking, and it was a huge deal. I was rightfully banned from the internet for a while, not that it mattered much, because I wound up meeting another awful dude older than me, but this one was locally grown, lol. Yeah, I learned a pretty important lesson about the internet early on. I started using the internet in 2002 when I was 12, just for online chat rooms and Neopets. I met a girl who became my girlfriend and she asked for our phone number. I gave it to her for a while. We kept getting phone calls late at night, which ended with them hanging up. My parents were confused. I told them I gave out our home phone number and they were not impressed. Ended up unplugging the phone overnight, each night for a while, and the calls stopped. The girl never appeared in the chat room again. Pretty mundane story, but it still weirds me out for some reason. Blowing my mind I had as much freedom on the internet as I did back in the day. I had my own PC in my room at 13 years of age with all the internet I wanted. Luckily, all I did was play Counter-Strike and WoW. My story is similar, except I was 16 and he was 26 and the host of a podcast. We started talking on the show's forums, and he had me sending nudes the whole time. We eventually met up after I was of age and ended up meeting up a handful of times, sleeping together, etc. We drifted apart, and I only realized what happened a couple of years back. I'm in my 30s now. Thought it was innocent and fine the whole time, just deleted him on social media without saying anything. He requested me again and I ignored it and blocked him. I don't know what else to do. I hate it and still think of it often. Yeah, it's pretty violating to look back on these things and realize how awful they really were once you're far enough away for some perspective. Story 5. My first boyfriend, I was barely 15. He was 21, worked in a local shop, and all the girls at my school liked him, so it came as a bit of a surprise when the biggest dork ever, me, somehow landed him and not any of the popular girls. We dated for maybe 4 months. It turned out he was sleeping with 3 girls in my year, which I found confusing because I'd begged him to take my virginity to no avail. Always found it really weird and insulting that he never even wanted to sleep with me. Plot twist, my mom had stormed into the shop when we first started dating and told him, "If you take my daughter's virginity, I will kill you with my bare hands." God bless my mom. That's a legendary mom. Story 6. When I was 16, a school teacher of 30 years used to touch me and text me stuff. I didn't really realize it was bad until some years later when he married a girl from my class. I didn't tell anyone because I was scared that people would think that it was my fault. That exact experience, except he got in bed with me 2 days after I reached the age of consent in my state. I eventually got him fired. Mom reported him when I was suicidal, and everyone in the school turned against me because he was the most popular teacher. It was terrible. I'm sorry that you had to go through that, and I hope it doesn't affect your life too much now. Hey, the same thing happened to me. I was groomed by the most popular and influential teacher at school since I was 15. In a year, he made it look like he was tutoring me for university so I could come to his place 3 times a week after school. We would watch movies and kiss after. He got intimate with me literally 2 days after I graduated high school, so he was technically in the clear, although he made me give him blowjobs prior to that. Every time that happened, I had to run into the bathroom to throw up. I used to think I was allergic to sperm, when in reality, it was just a response to trauma. All this time, the guy was married too. The lies, the time spent around his wife, it all messed with my head so much. I was jealous, ashamed, and depressed all the time. Then she dumped him for another guy, and I ended up moving in with him. We lived together for 1.5 years until I could finally break up with him after a violent fight where I had to run for my life out of our apartment building late at night in one shoe. I don't know what he would have done to me if I hadn't managed to lock the door behind me to slow him down. It was like a horror movie. I was 15 when it started, 18 when I ran away. He was 34 by the time it ended. For years, this experience lived on the fringes of my memory. I just didn't want to think about it at all, but recently more of it has been surfacing. I've realized what happened wasn't my fault or a lapse of judgment. I was insecure, naive, and inexperienced. I never even kissed a guy before. I was manipulated, groomed, and used by the person I trusted and looked up to. I'm so mad at my parents and teachers for looking the other way and not intervening. I recently looked the guy up. He's gotten a country award as the Teacher of the Year and is mentoring younger professionals. I'm just disgusted and grieving my younger self. That guy needs to be reported ASAP. Story 7. I called off my wedding 3 months before it happened. Why? I was a 17-year-old. I'd have been 18 at the time of the wedding, about to marry a 26-year-old man who had been dating me for 3 years. I was a victim about to marry her abuser. The engagement ring, which I did eventually find out was fake, he has money, lots of it, but that didn't matter to me, was to buy my consent, silence, or whatever as he stuck his D in everything that moved. He was an alcoholic, a narcissist, a pedophile. Seriously, I wasn't a 14-year-old that looked like an 18-year-old. I was a 14-year-old who looked like a 12-year-old. I loved him because I thought he was saving me from my horrid situation with my family. My mom and I moved in with her boyfriend only to find out too late that he was an abuser. He'd take me away from it, even if it was just for a little while. I was so messed up, I ended up living in a boarding house when things finally broke in my abusive household because, of course, I was 17 and he didn't want me to move in until I turned 18. His career depended on a squeaky clean image. I ended up pregnant, having a violent end to my pregnancy that resulted in my daughter's stillbirth. Despite this all, I loved him, but he started picking at my appearance. I was gaining too much weight, even though I was at a healthy weight for my age and height. I had gotten hips and breasts, so we talked about dieting. I stopped eating. I drank water when I got hungry. Everything had to be low fat or no fat, low calorie or no calorie, and sugar free. It worked. I went from healthy to underweight. What made me realize that I wanted out was a box of chicken wings. I ended up moving back in with my mother after she was able to escape her ex. We lived near an indoor flea market / farmer's market that had the most amazing food vendors. I love food, and this diet was killing me. I was miserable, so I decided to have a cheat day and I went and ordered a box of hot wings from the chicken place in the farmer's market. As I sat down with my favorite movie and ate my favorite food, I realized that extreme dieting would always be my life. I also realized that him wanting me to be so unhealthy wasn't right. I was tired all the time, cold all the time, hungry all the time. I decided while happily munching on that box of wings, I was done. I called him and told him that I was done. It took me another 3 years to truly be done, but the very expensive wedding was done and over. He never got any deposits back. It took me almost a decade to realize that he wanted me to look like a 14-year-old forever. It was also always dismissive about the age difference, citing that I was mature for my age. I now realize it didn't matter. I was a child. It's bothered me for a long time how our society fetishizes looking like a child. If you look at Hollywood and how actresses have to keep stick thin to be considered attractive, then everyone is shocked when it comes out that all the producers and directors are pedophiles. It's also hugely prevalent in anime where the schoolgirl thing is overtly sexualized. Makes me sick. My daughter was a young, appearing 19 when she met her first husband. He was 28. They married when she was 23. After a few years of marriage, he no longer had any interest in intimacy with her, and they eventually divorced after 5 years of marriage. A few months after the divorce was finalized, he was arrested in a pedo sting, trying to hook up with a 14-year-old girl. He was sent to prison for 10 years. It became clear that he lost interest in my daughter because she no longer looked like a teenager. I think you really dodged a bullet. Sounds like you may have ended up in the same situation as my daughter. Story 8. I was 14 and dated a 25-year-old cop. He never asked my age and I never told. One day, we were chatting on the phone and I told him that I got some homework to do and I'll call back later. He said, "Freshman year of college getting to you, huh?" I said, "College? I'm in high school." Dead silence. Then he asked how old I was and I said 14. He freaked out and was saying, "I'm gonna go to jail for this and I'm gonna lose my job." He said, "I can't see you again and please don't tell anyone." I said, "Yeah, of course." I got why he was scared and I never saw him again and never told. When I was 16, I dated one of my older brother's friends. He was 26. He knew I was younger, but not exactly how much younger. and we just never talked about age, starting our fling in the summertime, so when soccer practice began in the fall, he was confused, as our local college doesn't have a team. He ghosted me and my dumb little heart was broken, but looking back, I'm so glad he saw it as creepy and weird and saved us both from more trouble. This one reminds me of the time I dated a lawyer. I wasn't underage at the time, I was actually 23, but I've always had a baby face, and he was still considerably older. We'd been chatting for a while, but during one date he took me somewhere that definitely required ID. Before the person checking could even ask, my date prompted me to give my ID to the guy. It seemed super pushy, and I was just awkward, yeah, I'm 23. He looked a little relieved after that. We actually spoke about it later and laughed it off. I can't blame him really, because talk about a career ruiner if I'd actually been underage. He probably could have approached it better though. I bet that was a load off for him. Story 9. I had this internet boyfriend when dating/talking to people online was still taboo. For 2 years, I believe. He lived in British Columbia and was, I believe, 31 at the time, while I was in California and I think 13 when I first started talking to him. I was going through a bunch of crappy things during that time at home, dealing with constant fighting/domestic violence amongst my parents who tried getting back together, dealing with self-esteem issues and self-harm, and contemplating suicide or running away. He was, of course, there for me to talk and listen, and always offered a place at his home if I ever decided to run away. Even offered to buy any plane tickets for me if I just said the word whenever I was ready. He would always talk about the life we could have had if I did run away and such. I thankfully never did run away, but the summer I was entering into high school, the stars all seemed to align for me to finally meet him. I had always gone to summer camp with the YMCA in elementary and middle school, but high school-aged kids had a 2-week caravan instead. That year, it just so happened that the caravan was planning on driving from Los Angeles to Vancouver, BC, and all the way back. I immediately told my mom I wanted to go, and we got my spot reserved. He was definitely excited about finally meeting, and the plan was to hopefully have me sneak out of the campsite and spend time back at his place before bringing me back. We also discussed doing it, and I agreed to lose my virginity to him when we met. I was worried about him getting in trouble, but it just so happened that the age of consent at the time in Canada was 14, so he assured me it would be fine. The night came and I snuck out of my tent to meet him, and I forgot the reason why, but he didn't have his car for some reason, so the choice was to take a taxi back to his place or stay at the campsite. I was worried about getting caught off-site, so I figured we could just hang out somewhere away from everyone. We found a picnic bench and I thought we could sit and talk for a bit, but he was just trying to get right to work. He was suggesting that I lose my virginity on top of this picnic bench out in the open, and there was some random person's tent maybe 20 or so feet away. All they had to do was open their tent and they would be facing us and see everything. He was adamant about us doing it there because there was no other option, and my dumb self gave in to the pressure. So I lost my virginity at 14 in another country outside on a picnic bench to this loser of a 32-year-old. It was pretty terrible since it hurt. Wasn't the most pleasant environment, and he lasted maybe a minute. I had instant regret, but at least no one came out of that tent or walked by while it happened. Oof, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Your story hit very close to home. I experienced something similar when I was younger. Although I was not as young as you in your story, and the guy was not that old, the ending is still very much the same despite the fact that he pressured me to drink. I never drank alcohol before, which is why I only remember that it happened, and next I was lying on the floor of the bath because I was throwing up. While I was drunk, he then told me that he wasn't able to use a condom because of an allergy, and convinced me that I had to abort if something went wrong. I mean, what the hell? Thinking back as an adult, you only then realize how messed up these people are. I always felt a lot older than I was at the time and thus ran straight into the trap. My first real boyfriend after that then always blamed me for losing my virginity to someone else. Girls out there, please learn from these stories. Someone who honestly loves you will not do something like this. Story 10. I'm from a third world country where it is normal for 15 or 16-year-old girls to date guys in their early to late 20s, especially in the 90s when chat rooms became available thanks to the internet. At 13 or 14 years old with my girlfriends, we would meet up with 18 or 19-year-old boys, which now I know was not a good idea, but I didn't know any better back then, until I moved to a different country where I learned that there were strict laws in place for adults dating or doing stuff with teenagers. I was too stupid to understand why my mom mom was so upset when at 14 I had a date and got picked up in a car by a 24-year-old who bought me ice cream at McDonald's, but luckily he was very nice and took me home after. Can't say I wasn't pressured into doing sexual stuff at a very young age by much older men, but unfortunately that was the norm. Yeah, I spent the past 2 years teaching in a developing country. 2 of my senior girls, 18 years old, married men who were 28. They'd been dating for a bit at that point. I was floored. I asked why they were marrying men so much older than them, and many people of all ages were surprised by my concern. So I lack actual experience, but in college I minored in global poverty, and this is actually a huge problem in a lot of developing nations. A case we studied in one of my classes was about sugar daddies in Kenya and how sugar daddies led to the spread of AIDS, kept girls from finishing school, and were overall hindering development. Story 11. I was 16 and dating my 23-year-old supervisor from work at a fast food restaurant. It started like a normal story. I thought I was mature, he made me feel special, etc., and it was fine for a few months. He seemed sensitive. He had been engaged and had his heart broken before, and did seem genuinely pretty sweet. We would stay after work talking, and I'd try to sneak over to his apartment when I could. After maybe 6 months of dating, the owners of the restaurant found out and fired him. They didn't fire him for that, but found another excuse to get rid of him pretty quickly. After that, he couldn't find another job, and I felt responsible. I gave him a couple $100s a few times to help him make his rent, but after another few months, he had to move in with his dad. At this point, I started college. I went early, and he was living about an hour away from me. My parents didn't want me to see him when I still lived at home, so we spent a little more time together once I was at school. He still wasn't working and was pretty unhappy overall. He always talked about how much he loved me and wanted to get married, but I knew all along I didn't want to. I just felt so guilty leaving him. After we'd been dating for over a year, he moved several states away to live with his brother and try to get his life together. He got him a job and everything was going pretty well. We were doing long distance, and he kept trying to convince me to transfer schools out there. After a month or two of him being gone, I finally got the courage to break up with him. He became very depressed and even suicidal. He came back to visit, and I saw him twice. Both times, I had to stop him from doing something harmful to himself. I always reached out to his family or friends to make sure they knew what was going on, but eventually I cut off all contact. I looked him up a few years ago. He's married, has 2 kids, and is apparently a pastor or youth pastor. Wowzer. The first part of this is almost identical to my sister, except she was 16 working in a hardware store and her 24-year-old supervisor was showing interest in her. They moved out together when she turned 18 and had been dating for 5 years total when he told her his feelings for her had changed. Cue a messy breakup where my now 21-year-old sister is picking up the pieces of her first broken heart, having wasted 5 years of her life. I hope you're okay now, and that it hasn't affected you too greatly. Wow, this story sounds a lot like what is happening currently to my boss, M21, and my colleague, F16. We work at a pizza place, and they got together around 2 weeks ago. It's made everyone at work pretty awkward with them, and not a lot of people approve of it. Relationships at work usually don't pan out that very well, though some do. It's none of my business what's going on between them, but I'm just worried about them both. I'd quit the job. Story 12. My first boyfriend was 22 years old. I was probably 13 or 14 something. He was very controlling, the kind that tells me I'm not allowed to say no if he asks anything. He used to ignore me for days and not reply to me, and very often made me send him nudes, and I really hated it. But I wasn't allowed to refuse, or he would go find a girl who would satisfy him. A true woman. And I didn't see anything wrong at the time with this, but at least I didn't get into bed with him, even though he suggested that. Now I'm 21, and when I look back and think about it, I just feel so much shame and burden, and just asked myself why and wondered, didn't he see that I was a freaking child? And I get filled with sadness, and I feel like that happening at such a young age really contributed to things I have done and hated. All I can take from this is to be careful in the future and make sure it won't happen to my own kids. Exactly what happened to me. I was 12, he was 18, and I was stuck in that hell for 5 years thinking I loved him. He groomed me so bad I ended up with a lot of issues after I decided to break up with him when I was around 16 years old. He was exactly as you described your boyfriend. Screw these guys, and often insulted me pretty bad when I didn't want to send him a pic of what I was doing. He called me a whore and that I was cheating on him. I remember one time I ended up recording myself when I was like 13 in secret to the ophthalmologist for him because he didn't believe I had to go, and my parents found the video on my phone and called me a weirdo, lol. I was just a child, for Christ's sake. He used to call me names and every existent insult via phone calls and even video calls, but I remember feeling so helpless along the way because I didn't want to be alone. I didn't do anything wrong. He tried to reach out again to me when I was around 18 years old and had a new boyfriend, and I basically told him to piss off. I look back at that situation and just feel sick and angry. I always felt like he stole the little innocence I still had left in me. I was a victim of sexual abuse when I was 5 years old, and just finished destroying me. It's been hard coming to terms that I didn't deserve being treated like that, and I still haven't had new relationships because of this. I feel like I need to fully heal first. Stuff like this leaves you traumatized for life. Story 13. It honestly never clicked for me until I was much older myself. I just thought I was super mature, and that's why it wasn't weird that I was 14 with a 19-year-old boyfriend. It was a super toxic relationship. He cheated on me, stole from me, lied to me, and lied about me so much. He pretty much only came around when he wanted to screw me and would tell me whatever he thought I needed to hear to keep stringing me along. In my naivete, I thought this was just how grown-up relationships were, so I stayed, until I finally got fed up at 18 years old. Isn't it funny that when I was finally old enough to date him, I no longer wanted to? I thought I was cooler than the other girls in my grade because my boyfriend was a man. Looking back, I'm sure I was an easy lay as I didn't require much from him in return, like people his own age might have. And as I got older, I wondered if he ever felt odd getting into bed with someone who was so clearly a child. I also wondered how none of his friends, they all knew my real age, thought it was weird or called him out on it. I think that's the system they speak of when they say this kind of behavior takes a village of people who are not willing to protect a child. The irony of it is all that karma has blessed him with 3 daughters, and I'm sure he's had the scary thought more than once that another him will come along and treat his girls the way he treated me. Yeah, I dated someone who was 18 when I was 14, and it was a terrible relationship. I think when I was 15 and he was 19, we were at the public pool with his friends, and I was sad or upset because I had just found out he cheated on me. He was giving me a hug and trying to wheedle his way back in. A lifeguard who must have been about 19 or 20 and in his grade yelled at him to not touch me, and he tried to give this joking smile and shrug her off, but she blew her whistle and was like, "No, Brad, I'm not kidding. She is too young. Don't touch her." And that was the only person who ever said anything. Props to the lifeguard. Women supporting women. Story 14. I had just turned 18. He was 26. He flew across half the world to see me. I didn't want him to, guilted me into being with him. When I told my mom I felt uncomfortable being pressured, she too guilted me about him coming so far for me. Overall, super messed up. But the most disturbing thing is how pressed he was on getting married. This man really wanted us to tie the knot, have babies straight away. I had to remind him I hadn't even finished high school yet. That didn't bother him in the slightest. He was dead set on us getting married, moving to his country and having a family ASAP. Looking back, I can see that what he really wanted was to completely isolate me from everything and everyone I know. Worth mentioning, he was somewhat racist towards my people and wasn't big on the idea of coming back to my country, and seal the deal of me being 100% dependent on him by bringing some babies into the picture. And you know what? It felt so much like everyone felt that's what I should do, that I nearly went through with it. I shudder at the thought of what could have been. She didn't just dodge a bullet, she dodged a nuke. Story 15. I did this a lot as a child/teenager. Though all but one relationship stayed online, they were all still very sexual in nature. I never really realized they were predators, and the ones at fault due to how my mom handled me being groomed and abused by a 40-year-old man in the 5th grade. I got hardcore grounded and told not to talk to him. He got off with no punishment whatsoever, so I kept sneaking back to him. He made me feel important and special and mature. And then there were the guys I dated. A lot of guys in their 20s when I was 15 or younger. I was just a source of nudes and sexting for them, but it still made me feel needed. Then I started dating a 40-year-old man when I was 16. That's the one who broke the online barrier. He took my virginity. He ended up killing himself when he was caught molesting a 10-year-old. I still couldn't bring myself to understand that he was a predator. I had been hella groomed. It took a lot of therapy and medication to realize these people were the ones at fault. They were predators. I was a kid. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you don't mind sharing, please leave it in the comments below. If any of these stories have opened your eyes to anything going on in your life, please contact someone that you trust right away. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.